So I think there's lots of ways in which the organisation can try and help itself. So, for example, trend data, which shows how things are going over time, is very useful to the organisation rather than just a snapshot in time. And if you think about trend data in terms of benchmarking what's happening in your organisation compared with what's happening in other organisations in the same sector, then you can get an even better and broader and more externalised comparative view. So those are mechanisms for helping yourself. I think that also there are forms of data, and we often talk about hard data and soft data, but there are forms of data that sometimes get neglected. So how are you going to find out about what the attitudes are of the people in the organisation? Do you have any attitude surveys? Do you conduct those over time? Do you have things like customer satisfaction feedback that tells you something about how your customers think about the organisation? And so looking at attitudinal data, this soft data, is also very useful because it gives you some element of foundation for trying to prejudge how people will respond to the change. And I think also things like human resource management data, have you got high turnover in the organisation? Are there areas that that turnover pinpoints as areas of dissatisfaction in your organisation? So using all that data to try and understand what's happening in the organisation. And I would argue using the resources of the people in the organisation to do some of that analysis as well. There's obviously often lots of untapped resources that can be used. So that's how I would think about the analysis. I think thinking about actions around engaging staff, I think I was trying to argue that was probably one of the most critical areas, but it's also one of the most practical areas, that there are many mechanisms that people have talked about and used and tested that are good for engaging different types of staff in the organisation. So you might start perhaps by asking your managers to work in working parties, to think about what the options are for change. It may be that the board has already set the objectives of a change. It may be that they've set some of the timescales, but nevertheless, those processes still have to be unfolded into action steps and timescales that go with those action steps. It's very beneficial to have working groups or project teams, if you like, that are cross-sectional. So you take a group of people from your organisation and you make sure that they're a mixture of different backgrounds, come from different departments in the organisation, and they come from different levels in the organisation. Not too broad a range, but nevertheless they are viewing things from their perspective. And you give them a task. You ask them to work out how this plan is going to be delivered within a particular division or department, and they know the detail, so they can put some of the detail into that. You can ask, many of the staff will be quite challenged if you give them some kind of an analytical project to work on, and it's different from their day-to-day work, so that's again an engaging process. And just having small work groups come together and offer them some of the plans and be brave enough to ask, what's your criticisms of it? Do you think there'll be any problems? And then I think my final point would be, if you're going to develop a change in an organisation, you're going to disrupt things. So whilst you're busy disrupting things, why not say to people, is there anything we could do alongside this change? Is there any improvement you always thought we should have done that could be implemented at the same time so that the organisation can get maximum benefit out of the disruption? It makes practical sense. So those are just a few mechanisms, really, that people can use, but they do have beneficial effect. And I think it flows into the point about managing the uncertainty and the dynamism of the organisation. Because whoever is leading or trying to direct the change needs to build into their planning processes that there will be dynamism. So they need processes of reappraisal, processes of review at planned regular intervals where they're going to sit down and say, are things changing around here? Are there any hold-ups that we hadn't anticipated? Are there any external pressures that have come on the organisation in the last whatever period? And then obviously they have to plan how they're going to respond to those things. So that then has to be built into this change strategy in an add-on, if you like. And I think it does mean that on occasion you have to change the direction. You may have to alter the objectives for the change. And you've got to communicate that to people. Why are you doing that? Why is it going in a slightly different direction from what we planned before? So you've got to be brave to say that to people.